cause? No. This is a dead zone in here.
You know, when we've done a couple shows that have audiences, we have to follow
Yeah. Well, I just had to do mine earlier because of the notifications alarm was going off that I was getting email and stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, I need to silence my phone. Yeah, they'd have to search for it though, but it would be right on top. But how many books does Aaron Ra have, Caleb?
I think that's his first one. I mean, he's working on another one as we speak. I don't remember what the premise was. Hey, you get to be on the thumbnail.
Yay!
No one
All story.
Yeah, I know. Possibly, maybe in the next 3-4 years, maybe Matt Dillahunty will have his book done, since he's been working on it for 4 years, I think.
Okay, so yeah, then that's what's showing right now. Yeah, so it'll be like a set.
No, so that's one's not working. I can't stream that. I'm trying to delete that so it doesn't show up. Yeah, that's streaming. It's not showing up there.
Okay, so the links have been published. Either of you want to sit in John's seat? Anybody? Otherwise, it's just me. Show must go on.
No, because they'll still just pick up that camera.
Yeah, we don't have to have a camera though. We don't have to go to that camera. We just have these at a white shot and then a close up.
Oh, you mean on the webcam?
Well, that too, but
Yeah, we can just work off camera 3.
Yeah, it's no big deal. We don't even need to mess with
That camera.
Well, that's the one we're on now.
Yeah.
But we can not use 2 because 2's the 2-camera shot.
Yeah. Like I said, pretty much all I need is that one. So 4 minutes.
Hey guys, so hey Caleb, is it just going to be you? Is it
So we're talking about whether we just only use one camera or whether we actually move the set around.
okay. Mark, what is Mark? Is Mark
You guys are more than welcome to sit in John's seat. I'll just put it out there. Feel free. And don't bite.
Coming in, or
we may have one. Jim Helton of Tri-State Freethinkers and American Atheists. We also have
well, if John's not coming in,
a handful of potential comes up.
can we put you in John's chair? This camera 1's having a lot of issues with the color balance, which we're trying to fight with it, but we're not winning. So it might work out.
Okay, well, this one, I don't know. I'll just let it be known to our live streamers. This one may or may not become an official episode. But, all the same, the show must go on. We'll give it a shot. Okay. And with any luck, John will just walk in. I'll let you go with this. Go to auxiliary 2, the setting. I want to see which one.
You got a phone call for you.
We do?
Yes, sir. We're not live yet.
That is. All right. Did they say who it was?
He's on the line now with them.
And the normal one is going to be the snowball. So if you have to balance out the
Hello, caller. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Who am I speaking with?
Jim Helton with American Atheists.
Jim Helton, thank you so much for calling, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm glad to be on. It just worked out. I'm in my car, so I apologize. I'm driving in between presentations, so I got a few minutes. So I thought I'd give you a buzz.
All right. Well, we're.
Let's do this 1 minute video, and then we'll go to this call.
Okay. I've been told by my director here that we start here in about 1 minute. We're gonna go through our intro, and then we'll go pass the ball on to you briefly before we get started. I did want to let you know that we have run into a bit of a hiccup today. For whatever reason, John Loftus is not in the studio and I can't get a hold of him. So, you will be talking with just me today unless somebody wants to step up. No, last chance, anybody? Alright, Jim. You're going to be talking with me today. I will try to make this worth your while. Do you know approximately how long we have with you?
I mean, I have a 15-minute drive, but that doesn't mean I can't talk a little bit longer if you need me.
All right, man. Well,
I told them I was doing this, so just to go ahead and get everybody set up, and I might be a few minutes late walking in. Make sure that was fine.
Oh man, I really appreciate it, really. And so I'll take care of most of the housekeeping things, and we'll just for later in the episode, we'll jump straight to you as quickly as I can. Okay? All right. And we're about to start.
We Are Atheists is a show brought to you by volunteer atheists.
Uh-oh. All the sound tests in the world. I'm sorry, Jim.
We Are Atheists is a show brought to you by volunteer atheists from Free Thought Fort Wayne Incorporated. We're looking for members of our audience to call in to tell us what they believe and why they believe it. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting group.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for another episode of We Are Atheists. I'm your host today, Caleb Tittman. Unfortunately, John Loftus will not be joining us today. If we're extremely lucky, he may waltz through that door any moment, but for whatever reason, he's not here. We're going to go ahead and move on without him. Here on We Are Atheists, we want to have a discussion about what you believe, but more importantly, we want to talk about why you believe it. On the same token, we also want to promote positive atheism and secular humanism. So if you have questions, comments, concerns related to atheism or humanism, please feel free to call in. Our call-in number is 260-422-3902. You can also email your questions to weareatheiststv@gmail.com. And yes, that is EI, not IE. That I before E crap doesn't always work in the real world. As I'd mentioned, unfortunately we are not going to be joined by John Loftus today. However, we do have a very special guest on the line with us today. Today I'm joined off the bat by a man named Jim Helton. Jim Helton is the National Field Organizer for American Atheists, and he's also the co-founder of Tri-State Free Thinkers. Tri-State Free Thinkers has been very kind to We Are Atheists, and I wanted to do my best to return the favor. So, Jim, thank you for joining us today. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you very much. I had the opportunity to go to the Ark Encounter protests on July 7th, and this was the first Ark Encounter protest that I personally had ever been to, and I had a blast. I want to thank you personally. I got to talk with you while I was there, but just being able to interact with the people and get to talk with some of my own personal heroes, and also to do something for a good cause. on that note, I wanted to try, if I could, if you don't mind, I'd like to pass the ball on to you. Now, I've described what the Ark Encounter protests were all about in prior episodes, but I figured we might as well get it straight from the horse's mouth. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind explaining tri-state free thinkers' involvement, why they do what they do, and what goes on during these protests.
Sure. You know, when the Ark Encounter was being built, we came kind of late to the party. But we looked at all the separation of religion, government, all the issues with it, and we realized all the press was positive. Like, they were talking about this $100 million project and how great it was, and all we kept thinking is, it's anti-science, they're lying to people about the age of the earth, they're discriminating in their hiring practices, they're receiving up to $18 million in state money. They sent the state saying they're a for-profit business, they get this money. They sent the county and city a letter saying we're a church, we don't want to pay taxes. If you're single, you have to sign a ballot chastity saying you can't have sex. 75% of the real estate tax goes to pay back their junk bond loan. 2% of the employees' checks go to pay back the loan. The list goes on and on. The city and county gave so much away, they're on the verge of bankruptcy. So when we looked into this, we got very upset. So we wanted to change the story. And so we came up with the idea of what is the Ark Encounter about. It's based on the Noah's Ark story. So we put a 15-foot banner in front of their entrance gate and called it Genocide and Incest Park. And it made international news. Like, New Zealand, Switzerland, Germany, it made the Bill Nye film, the We Believe in Dinosaurs movie. There were 6 documentary film crews there. We were doing Fox and Friends Live, New York Times, Miami Herald, Washington Post. Everybody was talking about this issue. And the nice thing is, while threatening to put up a billboard called Genocide and Incest Park got everybody's attention, what we talked about was the talking points I just mentioned, the anti-science, the discrimination. And after we did that, the majority of all the stories on the Ark mentioned all the problems with the Ark and the violations of religion and government. We changed the story around the world with this. And we thought it was a one-time thing, but as we got further away from the protest, we started to see the stories go back to positive. So we decided to make this an annual event to keep the pressure on and to keep it into people that, hey, this is a problem. And this became the symbol of not only what's wrong with Kentucky, but kind of with the country on separating religion and government and all the discrimination. It's the heart of all those things. And we want to keep the pressure on. So hence, we do it every year. We invite speakers. We invite lots of organizations are involved. The Secular Coalition for America, Planned Parenthood sponsors it. Black Non-Believers were there. Tons of local groups, too many to mention, with amazing people that have been there over the last couple of years. Aaron Ra and Seth Andrews were there this year. We're looking to even bring some more names next year.
Excellent. Well, first I just want to say I thank you for all of that. I personally, like I said, this is my first Ark Encounter protest, but I mentioned during a prior show that those sort of protests are why I do what I do. I think that fighting that sort of ignorance is extremely important. Now, that said, I honestly didn't know some of the things that you had mentioned. So, for example, the fact that you had mentioned that they have to sign some sort of legal document that says that if they are not married, then they can't have sex and continue to work there. Now,
correct.
Seeing as they do have at least some tax benefits granted to them by the state, and given that we have protests, there are people out there bringing these issues up. My question right off the bat is, what sort of legal precedent have they presented that allow them to continue operating this way?
So the interesting thing, and this goes to why elections matter, the previous governor, when this was brought to their attention, and this was brought to people's attention, other great activists did this in the state of Kentucky, the governor said, hey, we're willing to give you this $18 million under the condition that you promise not to discriminate. And so Ken Ham sued the state of Kentucky for discriminating against him for not allowing him to discriminate. I can't make this up. And the transportation cabinet was, standing firm of, no, we're not going to let this go. you can't discriminate if you get state money. That's where we're holding you to. Anybody can work there. And we had an election, and Matt Bevin got elected. He then replaced the transportation cabinet overnight. And then they're like, you know what? Yeah, we're going to give you the money. You can do what you want. And hence, elections matter.
Yes.
And it would take the state of Kentucky to file suit, and they won't. They're okay with it. So we basically have no legal recourse. In any other state, this never would have happened.
So the only
because
way...
it's...
I'm sorry, so are you saying that... I'm going to let you finish your sentence before I continue. Go ahead, I apologize.
All right. So because it's the state of Kentucky, yeah, we don't really have any legal recourse. It would take the state to uphold this, and they won't.
Oh, wow, that's incredibly unfortunate. So, in other words, the only thing that's going to make something like that go away are, in fact, these protests, changing public opinion, that sort of thing?
Yes, and that's what we want to do. We realize that the other key part of this is we realize, people, like, we're not going to change a creationist mind. While we have, that's not our goal. We have done that successfully, but that's not our goal to people driving by, is we want to draw attention to this issue, but some of the leading activists around the country show up here. And not only they, and potentially other people were just individuals that were inspired or upset by this story and showed up. And after the original protest, American Atheists has 3 regional directors that came from this protest. We have multiple state directors, and I lost track of how many assistant directors in cities and a number of affiliates. We have 8 directors in Kentucky now. We had 1 when we started. And they were all there on that first or second Ark Encounter protest, that it brought people out to fight for the separation of religion and government.
More power to them. Okay, well, I want to sort of shift gears a little bit, seeing as I don't honestly know how long I'm going to be able to keep you on the line. But on the same topic, public perceptions, I was curious what your thoughts are on well, I'm going to call it historic, to be honest. As far as I'm aware, it's the most famous debate ever that wasn't political, the Bill Nye versus Ken Ham debate. Now, I have heard it argued that this was the worst possible thing that Bill Nye could have done, that it's possible that that Ark might not be here had Bill Nye not given Ken Ham that sort of platform, because, well, there's several different arguments. The most convincing one that I've heard is that it was a win-win situation for Ken Ham. Had he walked away from that debate in his mind and in the mind of people supporting him, paying his bills, as a total failure, he could have walked up to them and with his hands out and saying, hey guys, look, we're getting destroyed by these evolutionists. We need your money. So it's likely that they would have been in a panic giving him the money. And if he won, he said, guys, look, we're winning. We're doing what we need to be doing. We need to add more fuel to this fire. Give us your money. So I was curious what your thoughts on the Bill Nye and Ken Ham debate were.
I have strong opinions on this, and I've really looked into it closely, and I've met Bill Nye, and he invited me to tour the Ark with him. So, and I've talked to him about this issue, that in the past, scientists' views have been, you know what, we're not going to give them a platform, and they've ignored creationists because they don't want to give them credibility. My response to that is, how's that working for you? That's why creationism is running amok and most people believe it, is because we've ignored it and not taken it head on. We have museums and people not afraid, like some of the museums in our area won't publicly speak out against creationism. So it was absolutely important that Bill Nye took on Ken Ham publicly to do it. Having that said, the timing sucked. Did Ken Ham manipulate that to time it to raise money for the Ark? Absolutely he did. And do we wish Bill Nye wouldn't have done it around the Ark? Yeah, that was unfortunate. Did Ken Ham raise a few $1 million off of Bill Nye? Yes, he did. Did he raise enough money that he was short to do this? No, he did not. And they came up with the rest of the money. So even if Bill Nye wouldn't have done this, the Ark still would have happened. They still would have came up with the money. So that's a false statement. But they did raise a few $1 million on the back of Bill Nye being there, even though it was clearly Bill Nye destroyed him in the debate.
Yeah. I 100% agree with you, myself, personally. Now, other things that I'd like to talk about. As you had mentioned, as I had mentioned as well in prior episodes, there were several guest speakers. You'd mentioned Are and Raw. We also had Phil Ferguson, Seth Andrews. We had Kelly Helton as well. And one thing that I took away from this myself were different perspectives, different ways to approach this with creationists. Now, is there any particular reason why you chose the speakers that you did? Or I hate to sound crude, but is it more take what you can get sort of a deal?
No, we strategically do this with the art protest from this. So we always want to make sure we have at least one podcaster or blogger there. So last year we had Hemet Menta, the Friendly Atheist. Before that, I think it was Dogma Debate. We want somebody there kind of recording and documenting. We've always had more, but we want to, and like you were there, but we always invite one speaker that can make sure they document this thing to bring attention to it. So that is done. Phil Ferguson's been there at every single one, and he was coming again, so we asked him to MC. Are and Ra was at the very first one. We weren't at the second one, and when I met him last, he yelled at me, so I had no choice but to bring him. But we love Ard, so we were happy to bring him back. But that's kind of how we chose some of the speakers. My daughter, we chose her because she, on the Tri-State Freethinker page, even though we've had Arn, we've had all these speakers to record it, Kelly is over, out of the few 100,000 views we have, Kelly's over half of all the other speakers combined. She's more than all the other speakers combined out of all the guests we've had.
By the way,
she's speaking all over the country.
Just want to throw this out there. I actually did brag about your daughter to my wife on the moment that I got home. I was telling her about the different speakers, all about the event, the vendors, this, that, and the other. But then I had gotten on the subject of talking about your daughter and her speech because I was thoroughly impressed by not only her youth, but her ability to overcome that. As far as I'm concerned, when she was up on stage, she had the authority of a 35-year-old professional businesswoman. I mean, she was a phenomenal speaker, is what I'm getting at here. And you did well by her, is what I'm going to say. She, by the way, is, I'm sure you are well aware, but for our audience here, she's the equal rights advocate for Tri-State Free Thinkers. Now, I wasn't going to ask you much about any of the other speakers, but seeing as she's your daughter, I was wondering if you might mind explaining what her roles is and how do you work with her directly? I mean, I'm assuming.
Yeah. So here's the amazing thing. So when I took my role, I was the spokesperson for the Tri-State Freethinkers, and I did speeches all over the city and the state. And when I took my role with American Atheists, I was representing American Atheists. So we needed somebody to speak on behalf of the Tri-State Freethinkers, and she was the best candidate, like hands down. Like, she represents us well. She wrote that speech. She can deliver a speech. She interviews well. And so we were like, the board unanimously is like, Kelly is our equal rights advocate. It's not an artificial title. When Planned Parenthood asked the Tri-State Freethinkers to testify against the 6-week abortion ban at the State House, we sent Kelly. Kelly testified at the State House. She answered questions from the committee. She fired back. They quoted her 4 times after that. She's done things with the ACLU. She's done things with NARAL. She spoke at national conventions, the March for Science, the Women's March in front of 10,000, 15,000 people. When the Tri-State Freethinkers are asked for a representative, that's who we send. And now, and when other national conventions call me and say, Jim, we need a speaker, I'm like, I would love to speak at your convention. I've been wanting to speak there for years. And now they're like, oh, I'm sorry, Jim, you don't understand. We don't want you. We want your daughter. And I'm proud and pissed off at the same time. It's an amazing feeling.
Oh, man. Wow. So are you going to say it? Are you going to say the words, the master has surpassed, or excuse me, the pupil has surpassed the master on this one, you think?
Not quite yet, but there's no doubt she's going to. Yeah. And the funny thing is, 3 years ago, she was afraid to talk to a stranger or speak in public. We thought she had speech issues because she wouldn't even talk to people. And she was sitting at one of our meetings, and Planned Parenthood was there, and she heard what was going on, and she got upset. And the next day, when I was doing a speech, for Planned Parenthood, she's like, I would like to say something. And she wrote 2 sentences. Her first speech was with Planned Parenthood at the University of Cincinnati, and she said 2 sentences. And the crowd went crazy. And then she's like, the next time I spoke, she's like, can I say more? And I helped her write a 30-second speech. That was it. Her speeches were 30 seconds, and then we got her up to a minute. And eventually, now she's writing her own speeches and delivering them and just crushing it. But that's how we started her, with 2 sentences and then 30 seconds at a time, to get her voice and her confidence. And she's worked hard at it. She trains at it. She really works on her delivery. And when the funny thing is when we had a board meeting with the Freethinkers, I'm like, we need a student advocate, to represent students. And she's like, I'm a student. And I'm like, I'm a student speaker. I'm like, no, you're not. You're a speaker. You represent the organization. You're not in that student speaker category anymore. And that was a compliment to her, even though she was mad we didn't pick her as our student representative or speaker.
Well, again, I do want to thank you and your daughter for your participation and everything that you guys do. I can't say this enough, how thoroughly impressed that I was with this entire event. All of the speakers were on point. Everybody that was there was just incredibly nice and passionate. And that was my first protest on that scale that I've personally ever been to. So that was.
And I will tell. Yeah, and I will tell you, and you're talking to somebody that protests every other day and does this for a living. It is truly a unique experience, and we've talked to the Secular Coalition for America, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists. They kind of all agree coming to this thing. It's a unique experience, unlike any other. If you've never protested before, you need to come. If you protested before, I guarantee you, it's unlike anything you've ever done before. And people remember it; they never forget it. And it's a game changer after witnessing something like that, of people wanting to get involved and wanting to do more. And we're thrilled to do it, and we're happy we're doing it every year. Even the Ark Encounter sent employees there. They like it so much that we had Ark Encounter employees there.
Wow. We had an Ark Encounter employee at the protesting, or just...
Yeah, no, they sent them. There were multiple. There were like 3 or 4 of them there.
Wow.
I'm surprised you didn't know that or run into them. But yeah, they were there.
Yeah,
they were talking to people, discussing, having a little friendly debate.
Oh, okay. Now, I didn't spend a whole lot of time around people who were debating. Like, I did happen to notice a couple of times R and Raw caught words with a couple of people here and there. And as excited as I was to finally be able to witness something like that in person, I also had other obligations trying to do things for We Are Atheists. And there was also a booth there that somebody had set up. And I wanted to ask you about this, because this was the only booth that I'd seen that I didn't get a chance to get more information about. But there was a booth where there was a black gentleman sitting at the table, something about...
Let's chat?
I'm not even sure what his name was, but his whole spiel was, ask me anything. Yep. And let's talk about that. Just out of sheer curiosity, can you tell me more about that? Because that one was very intriguing. This, by the way, for our viewers, there are several vendors at these protest events, and most of them are there to get to know you, market some of their product, or get you to learn more information about XYZ and whatnot. And there are also some that are there for entertainment purposes. As far as I can tell, I'm guessing that this is a guess, and this is probably a horrible guess, but I'm guessing this was there for entertainment purposes, or to advance this guy's career, because it looked like he was live streaming that.
So a lot of the national organizations we give free tabling space to, and the local organizations, we want to promote them so people get involved and get connected with wherever they are, and connect people where they are. But this gentleman, he runs, I think it's the YouTube page, Let's Chat. And he contacted us and said, hey, I would love to set up a tent at the Ark Encounter protest, and I would like to interview people. And I like interviewing Christians, I like interviewing atheists, and I want to have a discussion. And we looked into it, and we're like, sure, come on out. And his booth was very engaging. I ended up talking to him. He challenged everybody that, when he'd ask you a question, you'd make a statement, he would challenge you. And he engaged people in conversation by asking questions, which is a great way to change people's minds and to get to put your differences aside. So it was a huge success. We really appreciate it. Was his idea. We really appreciated him coming out and do it. We'd be happy to have him back again. And you know, and if you guys want to come out and set up a booth and do interviews, or you know, for the next year, you guys are welcome to do so. I know you were going around the crowd doing that, but you know, you guys are welcome to set up a booth and tent and record as well. We'd love to have you.
Excellent. I will most definitely make a note of that, and I'm very likely will take you up on that offer. Before you go, I was wondering if you could, possibly talk about were there any problems? Were there any major concerns? Anything that came up that you weren't expecting? Anything like that? And then after that, if you wouldn't mind, just go ahead to sign off. Go ahead and say whatever it is your piece is, and we'll take it from there.
So we had some concerns. The event went off very well. We have an army of volunteers that are just amazing. Like that, you know, we have confidence. We've been doing this. We've been training people that we knew they would just take care of it. So there's too many names to mention, but I don't know if you saw the people volunteering and in the safety vests. Like, I cannot say enough to all the volunteers there that helped. But the Ku Klux Klan jumped into our Facebook page, and when people were asking what they could do or what they should bring, the Ku Klux Klan jumped in and said, we're going to bring guns. And they actually registered for the event. And we removed them from the event online, but we counter-protested their events in the past, and we've dealt with them. So we were concerned that they were going to show up while we were open to the creationists coming onto our site in a friendly debate. We did not want them on site because they threatened violence. So we contacted the police. We had extra security. We had extra police there. You may or may not have noticed it, but they were there, and there was quite a few of them with only a couple minutes away that were on call if need be.
Yeah.
But luckily, they did not show up. One of their leaders got arrested in Indiana a little while back, and they've been pretty disorganized since then. So they haven't shown up to a lot of things. I know. So they haven't shown up to a lot of things that they've threatened in the past. But that was our major concern. But like I said, we've done this before. We have great volunteers. They're well trained, and it went off without a hitch. And next year it's going to be on a Sunday. And we did multiple events around this. And a lot of the local people knew, but a lot of the national people didn't. That we do events on Friday. Like we had a game night on Friday. We had an after party at my house and dinner with the speakers on Saturday. We did like breakfast and disc golf on Sunday. So it's kind of turned into a weekend thing for the local people. But we want to open that up probably next year to let people, because people came in the first year from Canada. This year we had people from Oklahoma City, Seattle, Chicago. People come all over to this thing, that we want it to be a good weekend experience. So we're going to make more public the events that we're doing as we plan this next one, to make sure people are aware when they're coming in it's more than just a 4-hour protest, that there's lots of stuff going on all weekend, and it's all free. We want to make sure it's free for everybody.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim Helton. Jim Helton is the National Field Organizer for Tri-State Free Thinkers, and he is also the co-founder. I'm sorry, I said that. I said that incorrectly. He is the National Field Organizer for American Atheists, and he is the co-founder of Tri-State Free Thinkers. Jim, thank you so much for calling us. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me on, and I hope I can be on again soon.
Oh, anytime.
Keep up the good work and spreading the word.
Will do, brother. Appreciate
All
it.
right, see you guys.
Thank you. Bye. All right. Well, on that note, everybody, I want to go ahead and move on from here and kind of dive into what some of the speakers were talking about while we were there. Now, I have several of the videos that I had made posted onto YouTube and our Facebook accounts. I still have a couple more videos to post. So the Kelly Helton speech that we were discussing, that one's going to get posted either pretty late tonight or early tomorrow. And there's a Seth Andrews speech as well. Now, I wanted to start out by talking about what Aaron Raw talked about, because Aaron Raw was my personal favorite speaker at the event. And Aaron Raw is a funny dude, I have to say. If you ever get the opportunity just to talk with him, or even just to see him speak in person, highly recommend it. The man is hilarious and a great speaker. He speaks to the crowd, and he almost seems to speak to your soul, if you will. But he does a fantastic job of highlighting several of the absurdities involved with the art. For example, I didn't know this. the Ark Encounter exhibit itself, the building, I'm not going to call it an ark anymore, because it's not. It's a building shaped like a boat. This is another point that Arnraw highlights. It's already got water damage. Think about that. This is supposed to be the most sophisticated boat probably ever made. I mean, seriously, to think about a crew of 8 people making a boat on this scale, nothing like that's ever been accomplished. And they had specific instructions from God. You know, hey, you need it to be so many cubits. You need it to be this tall. You're gonna need, to do X, Y, and Z. Laid out blueprints, front to back, and yet at the same time, one thing that I thought was kind of funny was something that Seth Andrews brought up. I'm going to jump back to Arnraw here in a second. Was why would look, when we all know the dove story, Noah sent out the dove. God told Noah to send out a dove to see if the dove could find land. Okay, because this is how God operates in the world, apparently. He's willing to give out very clear, distinct instructions on how to build this boat, but he's not willing to point Noah in the right direction for land. Not that it would matter anyway, because you can't steer the ark. They could be 30 feet from shore, and it wouldn't matter. If they're not heading towards land, they're just going to keep going. There's no way to steer something like that. But anyway, so Arnraw tended to touch on many of just the common sense absurdities involved with the ark. And he asks the question, why create this illusion? Arnraw, as far as I'm aware, is under the opinion that Ken Ham and the like are charlatans, and they basically are doing this as a means to an end, whatever those means are. But it's apparent that, look, this is a giant illusion. This is a modern building made with steel tools, and it's supposed to emulate something that was built basically in the Stone Age. And the whole story is absurd. But the fact that they want to teach this to children as fact, beyond that, they want to incentivize schools to send children there on field trips. And again, this is the most ridiculous story in the Bible. There's a lot of nonsense in there, but nothing quite compares to the flood myth, especially given the fact that we have so much evidence to the contrary, and yet there are still roughly, at least in this country, 30 million evangelicals and Catholics willing to believe that the earth is actually 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Footnote, yes, I do understand that Catholics, as a whole, accept evolution, but talk to them on an individual basis, you're gonna find that that's not always the case. In fact, anyway, I don't want to get into ad hominem against a person who's not even here. But then Seth Andrews stepped on stage, and I don't know how you could not love Seth Andrews. Seth Andrews, of the Thinking Atheist podcast, I think he was the final speaker, if I'm not mistaken, but his speech was fantastic. I'll just kind of highlight some of the points that he had brought up. He asks the question, how could an omniscient, omnipowerful, omni-being regret anything? Because the whole point of flooding the earth was because God realized one day, oh crap, I messed up. He relented and said, all right, well, I guess we'll just hit the reset button. And I love the way Seth Andrews put this. He says, why would you concoct some elaborate Rube Goldberg mechanism as opposed to simply doing something like, I don't know, flash all the bad people out of existence, right? Why kill so many innocent animals, wipe out all the plant and animal life and all this jazz, flood the earth, go through all this stuff, and then make the water magically appear, magically disappear? Why go through all that? It's not a very efficient solution. And so that was just the point that he brought up. It's not necessarily a disproof by any means, but it definitely appeals to one's common sense, really. And also, apparently nobody else on Earth at the time had a boat. Apparently it was just Noah. Nobody else on the entire planet had a boat. So, whatever. So then he also asks a lot of other questions here, like ones that I never thought of. This one intrigued me. He asks, well, what about the animals' diets? Now, that was a question that I never really thought of. There's plenty of other concerns that I'd thought about before, that I've debated, things like the methane buildup from the fact that there's only one window in this entire ark, and you have all of these animals. They got to eat, they got to poop. That gas, those nauseous fumes, they got to go somewhere. And if they don't have anywhere to go, then they're going to just kill the occupants of the boat. So but he goes beyond that. He asks, well, what about things like, think about this. A panda, for example, has a very specific diet. They only eat bamboo. So Noah would have somehow, from the Middle East, had to go and find bamboo, specifically that was native to these types of pandas. We'll just, the giant pandas, whatever. Get a year's supply of that food, bring it back and put it on the ark. I mean, it's just not feasible. I mean, that food wouldn't survive for a year on the ark. There's a lot of different problems. And then you also have, what about the carnivores? What about the meat eaters, the ones that only can survive off of meat? I mean, if you're a cheetah in a cage next to an impala, you're going to start licking your chops. It's inevitable. I mean, what are you going to do? And you can't, there are certain animals that you can't feed fruits and vegetables to. Some animals require meat. It's just a fact. And that was not allowed on the ark. How could you? You had a very specific number of each animal for a very specific reason. You can't. So I don't know. I'm sure that there are plenty of excuses. I've heard everything from, hey, it's a miracle, to, well, we just don't know how they did it, but obviously it got done, appealing to presuppositional thinking on that one. But then there are other concerns with the ark story that just make it incredibly fish onto the ark, because anything that breathed the breath of life through their nostrils was required, but anything that didn't do that, wasn't required. So there are certain things that, which by the way, doesn't account for things like dolphins, for example. That, by that definition, by those standards, they should have been on the ark, but, you know, semantics, we can get into that stuff later. And then lastly, I was going to try to get some back and forth with John on a lot of these different topics, so sorry if I'm not presenting them in the most entertaining fashion. But I did want to talk about R and Ra specifically. I want to make it known that R and Ra has a YouTube series out there called The Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism. Now, he also has several other web series out there as well, but this one's by far my favorite. This one, and there's another series that he has called Systematic Classifications for Life. R and Ra is heavily steeped in biology, evolution, and the scientific communities thereof. And his contribution is he's created the most elaborate and inclusive phylogenetic tree, period. This being basically the tree of life, if you will, for those who don't know what that is. It's an ongoing process. They're nowhere near getting it done. They probably never will. It's probably not something that can be done within a single lifetime. But R and Ra has really spent the last probably decade or so really putting his efforts towards disproving creationism, and as such, he turned his YouTube miniseries, The Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism, into a book. And while I was at the Ark Encounter protest, I got myself a signed copy of this book. This book is simply titled The Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism. And long story short, this book takes you from the beginning. It explains what creationism is, and the premise of the book is to obviously falsify creationism, but at the same time he's also trying to bolster the evidence that we have for evolution. So he really kind of starts from the beginning and works his way ahead and really explains all of this stuff. Fantastic book. One more time, Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism. But if you don't want to read the whole book, again, just the web series is basically the same thing, and there's moving pictures for those who like it. Now, I was also going to somehow and smoothly transition into a conversation where John and I would recap the debate that he had had with Kent Hovind. I thought that since we were talking about the Ark and creationism, it would be an appropriate subject matter. That being said, I'm going to have to spitball with the camera and the audience on this one here. So, for those who don't know, we had a debate on our show. It was our very first breakout episode between Kent Hovind, and our debaters on our side were John Loftus and Christopher Rex. The subject of the debate was, is there good evidence for biblical creation? And so I'm just going to sort of go through this debate point by point, because there was We've had quite a bit of feedback on it, especially on our YouTube account. Not all of it's so good. Kent Hovind has a huge following, so you're going to see a lot of trolls from his side come to our side. And that said, I don't want to make excuses or anything. I thought the debate went rather well. It just depends on how you evaluate evidence, which is one of the talking points of the debate itself. So Kent actually began by trying to define certain words such as evidence. He was arguing that there are certain types of evidence, and that are different kinds of evidence, and that we are justified in believing in things based on these evidences, even though they might be, some certain evidences might not be as strong as others. And he used the example of forensic science. As far as I'm concerned, we can certainly infer things from evidence, as forensic scientists do, but ultimately, then this is just a guess. I'm not going to assert this as fact, but I'm guessing that what he's trying to do here is to lower the bar on what constitutes as good evidence, because he also wanted to try to define exactly what that means. What is good evidence, which is the whole point. Now, he really does. He hammers down on the fact that people infer things from evidence and uses this to bolster his case, which is, it's just stupid to suggest that because people infer things that therefore that makes your creationism more likely is absurd. That's a terrible argument. It doesn't lead anywhere. His point is that, you know, people can be looking at the same bit of evidence and come to two different conclusions, and this is how we can have people on the same jury who think that the same person is guilty and or innocent, right? So you can have different perspectives on the evidence, but that doesn't change the fact that a thing, whatever it is that the evidence is supposed to be uncovering, there is an objective truth somewhere underneath all of that, and our opinions, they simply don't matter. So what he's saying here is that Christians look at the evidence, broadly speaking, and they see evidence for creationism. And atheists, they see that same evidence, and they see evidence for evolution. Now, basically what this kind of boils down to is he's trying to butter up the audience to get them used to the line of argument for what's called the argument from design. He's trying to make it so that because people look at the world and intuitively think that this has to all be designed because it's so amazing, that is in and of itself good evidence for biblical creation. Remember, that was the topic of the debate. It's simply not the case, and I hope that you guys can understand where I'm coming from on that. So Kent, I'll just say this, Kent is an experienced debater. He's got several hundred debates under his belt, and you know, that really helps him to get his message across. I've said this before, and it's I'll say this, I'll go ahead and say it. I think that he's an excellent used car salesman. That's the impression that I get from him. Now, I'm not going to say that he's a bad guy or anything like that. I had nothing but great experiences talking with him and his people. But at the same time, you know, that doesn't mean that a really shady used car salesman can't be a great guy when he's not on the clock either. You know what I'm saying? So, anyway, so moving on, the fact that since someone can come to a completely different conclusion based on the same evidence, in something like a murder case, he's trying to suggest that we can infer, therefore, from the world around us that the Christian God exists. Try to follow his line of reasoning here. He's a silver-tongued devil for sure. So, in other words, he's trying to put the evidence for creationism or a common designer on par with the evidence for common descent, which simply isn't the case. In fact, I'll skip ahead here. Chris Rex made an excellent point later on in the debate. Sorry, my notes are kind of scrambled here today. So Chris had noted that what Kent seems to be doing here is not accounting for enough data. So, for example, we had some difficulty later on in the debate with some of our terms. Kent wanted to use the word kind when talking about different kinds of animals because for reasons. But anyway, there was some fogginess as to what kind is, and Kent seemed to be playing as though he wasn't quite sure what a species is, or even if he was making it seem like a silly idea. And one thing that Rex had noted was that you're just simply not accounting for enough. Kent was saying that we can see the fact that most animals have, you know, one bone here, two bones here, 5 fingers, 5 toes, this sort of thing. Homogeneous, I believe it's called, attributes, where you see these similarities, that this is evidence for a common designer, whereas obviously this is in fact evidence for a common descent. So what Rex is saying here is that all you're doing is accounting for structural similarities. You're not accounting for other factors, things like DNA. The DNA evidence alone is enough to prove evolution. I'm willing to stand by that statement. If anyone out there wants to refute that statement, please feel free to call and tell me all about it. Our number, 260-422-3902. You can also leave your questions, comments on the YouTube live stream chat. If you are watching, we'll be happy to take your questions as well. We have about 15 minutes or so left in the show. Lastly, you can also email your questions to weareatheiststv@gmail.com. Another point that Chris had made that was a very good point was that, well, actually, let me back up a step here. So, still talking about kinds versus species. One of Kent's arguments was that everything only ever produces, quote, after its kind. A dog only ever produces a dog, cats, you know, squids. And, you know, not just animals, this also applies, you know, fruits and vegetables, so forth, etc. And he slipped up. In that same sentence, basically, he had admitted that wolves are descendants of, or excuse me, dogs are descendants of wolves. Excuse me. And Chihuahuas, for example, are a species or a breed of dog, but they are clearly not the same species as a wolf. We know this because they can't breed. There's a barrier there. However, Kent admitted that we can get wolves from dogs, or excuse me, dogs from wolves, and you can still interbreed there so that it's still the same kind. But his claim is that Chihuahuas are the same kind as wolves. This is counter to his own reasoning, because a wolf can't bring forth after its kind a Chihuahua. It's just not possible. It cannot happen. So this was an excellent point, which I wish was highlighted more heavily in the debate itself, which is why I want to talk about it now. We're a little limited on time. I won't have time to go through the whole debate. But this was an excellent point, one that I'd never heard myself either. And it was well presented, but it was presented a bit softly, in my opinion. I think it should have been really hammered down on, because that's an excellent point. If you're willing to admit microevolution to the extent that wolves can become dogs, then to say that given enough time you can't get anything that won't be a non-wolf or a non-dog is absurd, because we already have an example of that. Chihuahuas are not wolves. They can't breed with wolves. They're a different species. That's just how these things work. So anyway, that was a great point, and I want to give kudos to Rex on that. John Loftus, during the debate, he wanted to offer alternate perspectives from the Christian worldview. He makes the point that, in fact, most Christians believe in evolution. As I mentioned earlier in the show, Catholics as a whole believe it. If you ask the Pope, it's an acceptable doctrine. You are allowed to believe it. Let me put it that way, in fact, because that's really the Catholic position. Not that it is true, but that it's okay to believe it. But it's also okay to believe that the Earth is 10,000 years old. They're not really willing to put their foot down on a position there, for good reason. They would lose quite a few constituents if they went ahead and said, hey, guess what? We're going to go ahead and go with evolution. Sorry for your luck. Might end up having a lot of converts from Catholicism to Baptists. That would be my guess, or the evangelicals. But that was one of his main lines of argumentation there for John. But again, so Kent Hovind made a lot of interesting points. I mean, to be fair, the homology thing is something which goes against our intuitions. We see something that looks similar, and we see something so incredibly what we consider to be complex, the human body, even just a single cell. It's incredibly complex. And that was another one of the arguments that Ken had brought up. This argument that because it's complex, it must have been designed. This is a common trope that you'll hear from creationists and the like. Matt Dillahunty does a great job of really hammering down the point that complexity is not the hallmark of design. Generally speaking, it's actually simplicity that tends to be the hallmark of design. But in either case, you can't really use one or the other to prove that a thing is in fact designed. Really, the only thing that you can do at the moment, as far as I can tell, in order to really try to hash out definitively one way or the other if a thing is designed, is to contrast it with nature. I agree with Matt Dillahunty on this. I think that to assume that nature is designed is a terrible assumption to make, one that needs to be justified before you can make that assumption in the first place. And that has yet to have ever been justified. Nobody has ever proven beyond a shadow of a doubt by any stretch of the imagination that the universe had to have been designed. There are several arguments, usually cosmological arguments, the argument from fine-tuning. These are arguments which really are, as far as I can tell, they help feed these creationist arguments as well. Why? I don't know. Look, we're running short on time. I think we have about 5 minutes left in the show, if I'm not mistaken. And I wanted to ask the question, well, why do people believe this? Right? This is not a majority opinion. The majority of people in this country don't believe that the Earth is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old, but there is a large enough faction that believe this, and this faction is so outgoing and willing to put their money where their mouth is. They're willing to go to the polls and vote the way that their conscience tells them to vote on these issues, and they tend to vote more than the secular. There's one thing that we need to change, folks. The secular community, we have to start hitting those voting polls much more frequently. That's our biggest downfall as a community. But the evangelical communities have almost complete dominance. Really, we've been taking a lot of ground from them over the years. We could thank the Freedom from Religion Foundation and other similar organizations for battling that, for taking on that front. I mean, that's a brave battle. I mean, just wearing this shirt, which, by the way, let's talk about that real quick before we go. I just wanted to mention this here. This is a shirt that you can get on our Cafe Press website. It's simply cafepress.com/ I'm sorry? You're talking to me. I'm hearing it. Someone's telling me not to talk. What's going on? I'm giving out the information. Is that not okay? Okay. I'm going to make a note. About 5 minutes left. I'm going to have to edit this out. Sorry for those of you who are watching this live. I wouldn't normally interrupt a show to ask a question like that, but this isn't live on cable. It's only live on YouTube. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this little tidbit out and continue on. We Are Atheists has our clothing line up and running on Cafe Press. The website for that is cafepress.com/ We Are Atheists. There are links available on our Facebook page. Simply search for We Are Atheists in your search bar and you'll find us. Look for this logo. And on YouTube, you'll find us. Another thing that I wanted to mention briefly, real quick, this button here that I'm wearing is actually for the black non-believers. I wanted to give them some love. While I was at the protests, they had a booth up there, and I thought it was great to see them there. Unfortunately, black individuals, minorities in general, tend to be incredibly underrepresented within atheist and humanist communities. The same applies to women as well. Women of all demographics are incredibly underrepresented in the atheist and humanist community, so I just wanted to give them some love. So, so we have our clothing line up and running. I just wanted to throw that out there. But anyway, guys, unfortunately, I think I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this one up just a bit early today. This has just been a one-man show, sort of an experiment run as is. I want to thank everybody for participating. I'm going to double check, make sure I don't have any housekeeping items briefly, and I'm pretty sure that we should be good. Oh, I apologize. We do have one other housekeeping item. Our artist outreach program. I want to try and mention this as often as I can. On this set, I want to be able to display local artists or local area artists' work right here on either side of the hosts and get them in the shot. my goal in this is to give local artists a platform to have their work on display, give you guys the opportunity to put your work out there. And honestly, I think that the arts are incredibly important, and especially within secular humanist realms and atheist realms, I want to quelch the argument that you can't have fine art without a belief in a higher power. Believe it or not, this does come up. I want to quelch that. But mainly, I really want to help out the arts. I'm passionate about the arts, and I want to help them out as much as I can. As I've mentioned in prior episodes, the backdrop that we normally have back here, the Fort Wayne cityscape, that was done by John Caskets of Casket Spray Art. Just got that framed the other day, by the way. So John, if you're watching, we're gonna be signing that poster, I assure you. I'm looking forward to that. It's gonna be going up in my office forever, not for sale. And I think, other than, I'm just gonna mention one last thing. We do have a Discord service. For information on that, check out our Facebook page. There's all sorts of fun things and channels. You can talk with the We Are Atheists community, debate, have fun, put forth ideas, and ask questions for the show if you like. Information one last time is on our Facebook page. For future reference, for those who would like to call in, we are a show dedicated to the great debate. We want to talk about your isms, what you believe, but most importantly, why you believe it. And if you're not going to call in to give us something to talk about, we're going to promote positive atheism and positive humanism. We're going to denounce things like creationism, the Ark Encounter, the Creationist Museum, these sorts of things, because they are anti-scientific. They are a detriment to society, and they fuel ignorance. And on that note, I just wanted to mention that normally it's We Are Atheists, but today I'll leave off with I am an atheist, and I'll see you next time.